Welcome to Sunday at Blockhouse Bay Baptist Church. We are glad that you have joined us today. Have you ever purchased something new and received a how-to guide? I always find it humorous to know which guide you're going to get. We brought a speaker, and in that speaker, the guide was a book that had information beyond anybody's imagination for how to use a simple Bluetooth speaker. On the other hand, I purchased a smartwatch that did activity tracking in order to help with runs and staying in shape and just to know some of that information. And the how-to guide was a little fold-out piece of paper that was like a bookmark. That was like, here, turn it on, here's a few buttons, and good luck. And you can go online for anything further. You realize that how-to guides often either give us so much information that we get lost or not enough information to know really what to do with. These last 2 weeks, we've talked about hospitality. Hospitality as a process or a protocol that the Old Testament and the New Testament, Jesus and the ancients around their time used to engage the stranger, the other, people who were not their friends in order to change the status of that particular person. It involved some sort of welcome, as we saw with Abraham, of looking out for somebody who's out there who didn't have a connection, who was vulnerable, who needed assistance. And so that welcome was, come in and let me provide what you need, a meal, some water for washing your feet, something to help you find rest. And then you found out who that person was. Then you learned that person's identity. And from there, then you sent them along their way. You benefited them, blessed them, sent them along their way so they could continue on their journey. But knowing that you had shifted their status, their stance from being the stranger who was vulnerable to someone who'd shared a meal together, that you changed a dynamic that could in turn become friendship. You had blessed them or benefited them with what you had and offered to them in any way possible how you could assist them, which provided for these relationships and dynamics that could move from stranger to friend. Is there a how-to guide to this hospitality? We read about it in the Old Testament, we read about it in Jesus. We recognize that God is someone who used this category, this set of protocols to reach out to the world. But is there a how-to guide for us and how we might practice hospitality? Well, the Bible always doesn't provide guides, how-to guides, and sometimes it does, and it might be too much for us or too little for us, kind of like those that I described earlier. But I want to take a look at Romans 12 as a potential how-to guide and to draw a few things from there for us. But what I find about how-to guides is often they state the obvious, but just point them out so that we might know, oh yeah, that's right. And I think Romans 12 does that a bit for us. So if you would turn with me to Romans chapter 12, and we'll read that together and then draw out a few points for us as a how-to guide of how to practice hospitality, which we are learning is more than just a meal. Romans 12, as you know, is coming off the heels of a significant theological discussion, teaching, exploration about how God is at work in the world and how he can justify sinners, how the power of Jesus can be for salvation, and how we can walk in the newness of the Spirit. And then how does that work with the way that the world operates, and especially in relation to Jews and Gentiles, a major discussion of that time about how do we incorporate people who are on the outside in. And so that whole discussion has gone on, and what it has revealed is God's great plans to redeem all humanity if they're willing to accept. And because of that mercy, because of that reality of God's love for his people, his creation, Paul describes all these things and then gets to the point of having believed those things. Then in Romans 12, here's what I want you to do with that great reality. So if you look with me, Romans 12. 12:1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith that God has distributed to each of you. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we through many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is in teaching, then teach. If it is in encouragement or to courage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Now be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with the people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. But on the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12 is a guide, a how-to guide of how all of this good grace that God has poured out upon us ought to be worked out in our life. And so let me just summarize. If you were to look back over 12:1 through 21, you'd notice in the very first verse, because of God's mercy, in light of God's mercy, through God's mercy, because of all that God has done for us, all that Jesus has been for us and is for us and will continue to be for us, because of that, we offer ourselves as living sacrifices. We are baptized, we put away our old way, we're raised to new life, and we walk now in the direction of God, with him, with his people. And so our living sacrifice, our life is now God's in light of his mercy and through his mercy. That is the foundation. And from that then, we are not to conform ourselves to the pattern of this world, which is not that the world is wrong, that the world seeks to live without God. That's what the problem is. And so we're not to be conformed to that way of thinking or living, but to be conformed to or transformed by the renewing of our mind and understanding that God is the ultimate. He's the reality, and his kingdom is the true way to live. And so we're supposed to be transformed so that we can see what God's way is. And then in that transformation, we don't do that on our own. For by the grace given to me, I say that every one of you is a part of the body. You are a part of this new kingdom, this church reality. And so you, as we have talked about, have a shape, have a vocation, and you're supposed to use those gifts within the church, within his community, to benefit and bless those who you're with. And in that, you do that through love. You use your gifts, but in love. And that's what binds us together. But you are a part of this body. You work out your faith in that. You work out your transformation in the church. It's the transformation station. And you do that in love. Joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who have need. And then the transition point. Practice hospitality. And from there he says, bless those who curse you, live in harmony with those outside of the church. Don't repay evil for evil, but rather bless those who are your enemies. In fact, go so far as to feed them and give them something to drink, so you may overcome evil with good. So the how-to guide is by the mercy of God. That's the foundation. We're transformed in our giving up ourselves to walk as Jesus' people in the church, using our gifts in love. And then as we interact with those who don't live seeking God, we practice hospitality. We bless those who curse us. We live at peace with everyone as best as we can, and we overcome evil with good by providing meals and drink to those who may even be our enemies. That is the playbook. That is the how-to guide. But I want to point out something here, just 3 things for us as we think about how do we do hospitality. If this is the general course of how we're supposed to live our Christian life, what about this hospitality? How does it fit in regards to it being more than a meal and the welcome of others? Well, if you go down to verse 13, it says, practice hospitality. And the next verse, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. In the original language, to practice hospitality is to pursue care for strangers. That's what it really works out to be. And bless those who pursue you. There's a word play here. Pursue, care for strangers, bless those who pursue you. And that pursuit is a way of, there's people who are after you and you're after something else. And so the first step of particularly practicing hospitality is that we are to be pursuing it. We are to be looking for ways, practicing, not passive, but pursuing, interested in looking out for the other. One of the reasons why we are in Auckland is because we, as people, have experienced the gift of living in different places outside of our own home country. Lived in Egypt and worked with an international church. We lived in Germany and lived and worked with an international church. And here we are in Auckland, not our own home, but living amongst an international people. As the census is coming out, we realize that Auckland is 40%, if not more, foreign born. That's a significant amount of diversity. Further, 28% of Aucklanders would recognize that they have Asian roots. 15 to 20%, somewhere in there, is from Pacific, and I think it's around 12 to 15% is Māori. And so you realize that Auckland, which holds 33% of New Zealand's population, is a melting pot of diversity. It is a significantly multicultural place. We're here because one of the desires of the church was to help our congregation actually resemble more closely the community that we live in, which is, like Auckland, continuing to diversify in significant ways. And how do we go about doing that? Well, first step is to pursue. Like Abraham, who noticed the strangers, he didn't sit and go, hey, I've got a nice tent over here. You're welcome to come in if you'd like. But rather, he went there and invited them, walked out of his tent to the place that they were and brought them to himself. That's the way that he operated. Jesus walked around as someone who looking for and was even invited into other people's houses, people that he agreed with and disagreed with, people whom society thought was questionable. He was out there as a guest, demonstrating and pursuing hospitality, the welcome and care of those who were strangers to him and strangers to the society. If we talk only about migration or immigration or diversity within Auckland, there are plenty of people who are not from here. And if you think about all the things that you enjoy about being a person who has long been in this community, you've got family, you've got friends, you've got connections with those who run the different shops, You get deals because of that. You know how the system works. And those who are moving in, and if the housing market is any indication, is that you most likely have neighbors in your area who don't know the system. And the welcome of strangers, hospitality, is inviting those people into your space or being guests in their space in order to bring them from the outsider to the insider. That is what we're called to do. That is the first step that Paul says, practice, pursue hospitality as much as you would bless those who are persecuting you to put you down. So part one of the guidebook, the how-to guide, is to pursue hospitality. Pursue the awareness of others who are in a community. Open your eyes to see and go after that hospitality. 2, verse 15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. It's asking for us to have an awareness of ourselves as people dependent upon God's mercy, and then to think of ourselves as just another person who is in a similar position as others, needing grace, part of community for a good reason. But how do you get to the point where you can say you can rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn? The second point of the how-to guide is to listen and learn. We enjoy telling our own stories. We enjoy being heard. We enjoy laughing and talking with those that we know deeply because there's this easy interaction. But it only comes that way through listening and learning about that other person. And one of the ways that if we start to pursue hospitality, of looking out for those who are different than ourselves, who are new to our community, new out there, who don't have the connections, who are vulnerable in our society, we must learn and listen. That means that we stop talking and we ask questions and we listen to the answers and we follow up. That means we're not so concerned about our own story, we're concerned about theirs. And that takes effort. That takes diligence. That takes self-awareness to say, you know what, I want to listen to you and understand who you are. Just the other day, somebody was in the church doing one of the alarms systems checks and was walking around and asking, how is COVID happening with this church? What's it done with your community? I said, well, we've gone to online things and we're doing YouTubes, but it is a challenge to try to connect with people. And he said, oh yeah, we go to the temple. What should my response be? Or where? How does that work? What's happening with your community? I've never met the guy and I may never meet him again. But my response was, how does this work with your community? What are your prayers like? What does your system look like? And how does it affect your family? How does it affect your friends? How does it affect that particular religious community? Help me understand, that I might help you to feel welcome in this place, feel cared about and listened to, and then at some point in the future, I might have another conversation with you. To get to the point where we can rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn is only given to us when we are demonstrating that we are people who are truly interested in the other. And that is demonstrated by our willingness to give up time, to give up our own voice, to give up maybe our agenda in order that we can listen and learn from other people and take a back seat. Live in harmony and think less of ourselves, or maybe think more of them. That's 2. So by nature of God's mercy, we should pursue hospitality because God pursued it for us. By nature of God's mercy, we should learn to listen and learn to others in order that we could rejoice with them and mourn with them. So we could sit in deeper reality with them by nature of God's mercy. And lastly, what should we do? Well, we've said hospitality is more than just a meal, but it's not less. When Paul says, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse, don't repay anyone evil for evil, but if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. And by doing this, you'll heap burning coals on their head. There's a real confusion about what that heap burning coals on your head means. But the point is really quite clear, is that that will have some sort of impact on that particular person. But what we're called to do is, again, to provide for the needs of those who are even our enemies. And if it's our enemies, why wouldn't it be for those who are just strangers to us that we don't know and we want to welcome in? Food and drink are those things that even the table, we sit down together and we share something, and you have to enjoy a meal together, engage and interact. You have to listen, you have to learn, and it's really important that we realize that food is one of those things that breaks down barriers. It allows for conversation and communication, for community. So it's really important for us to recognize that food and drink is something that we can offer as part of hospitality. And it's part of something that we can do with those. And whether it means that we're a good guest that is welcome into somebody else's home because they say, come on over. We'd like to get to know you better because we've been interacting with them in certain ways in our community or in our workplace. But to eat and to drink with somebody else who is a stranger changes the dynamic. And it allows us to show that we care for them. And it may mean that we, again, pursue. And so we must remember that we are people, by nature of God's mercy, ones who ought to pursue hospitality, listen and learn, and eat with and drink with and provide for others, even when they don't like us or even when they don't know us. And we're making inroads into them because that's what God's kingdom is like. I want to just say these are some things of the how-to. They're all things that you and I know how to do to pursue a goal, to pursue a relationship. We know how to do that. You make phone calls, you go out of your way, you make sure you try to catch up with somebody, you make progressive moves. We can do that, and we can do that by looking around and starting to notice more and more of the diversity within our own community, in our own workplace, in the shops that we talk to, and engage with those people who might be different than us. Then we take the time to listen and learn by nature of God's mercy, because He has done the same for us. We can do and extend that to others. And lastly, by nature of God's mercy, we can offer hospitality, food and drink, to those who might even be our enemy, but are at least strangers to us, and break down barriers of separation in order that we might make space for potential friendship. We are to be pursuing, to be overcoming evil with good. We are on the proactive. We're not passive. We're not standing at our church foyer doors, waving out the window at people who go by saying, we're really nice, come on in. Although that is true, and it should be, as Paul said in the first section of Romans 12, is that we are to be operating in a sense of love and care and hospitality with one another, or I should say kinship, friendship, care and deep interaction with each other as part of a body. We're bonded together. But that's not the way that we interact with those who don't know. We don't stand at the door and wave and say, I wish you'd come in, but we go out into that community to make sure that they know we are reaching out, because that's what God does with us. We overcome, we pursue, we are on the proactive side. And you might say, wait, well, this is for those who are good at hospitality. But that's not true. These commands are clearly for all of us. The ones that are specific maybe to us is to work out your particular gifts within the church, but all of us are to share with the Lord's people who are in need, practice hospitality, bless those who curse. If your enemy is hungry, feed. Those are all things that we are all called to do as God's people. And so we can't say, well, it's not for me. What we can say is that my situation makes it maybe a bit more challenging to do these certain things. But what we're being asked to do is, wherever we are now, to start moving in these directions of paying attention and pursuing hospitality, listening and learning, and providing for the needs of those who are strangers or enemies, that we might break down these barriers in order to welcome them in to God's kingdom. Hospitality is a tool. It is a process. It is a way that God invites us to bridge that gap between how we care and enjoy the community of the faithful, of Christians, and welcome those who are not, who are strangers to us. Maybe they're Christians, maybe they're not. Maybe they practice some other religion, maybe they are people from a completely different culture, but that's how we bring them in to our community, through hospitality, through us going out to be hospitable and good guests. And we do it through these different means. Last thing. To be a people of hospitality, where we, by nature of God's mercy, practice this pursuit, this listening and learning, this feeding of others. It will cost us. It will cost us in lots of ways. Remember, we've already laid down our life as a living sacrifice. That's not to be a surprise, but in reality, we get ourselves in rhythms and routines that are comfortable to us, and many of them are good. But if we get too comfortable, we think this is the way it's supposed to be, and forget that God keeps calling us to keep growing and maturing in ways that are going to be uncomfortable, yet beneficial in the long run. It will cost us time to watch out for the other. And if we don't have time, then we need to consider our priorities and say, I need to figure out a way of something I can adjust in order that I will have time. And again, our life goes in seasons. I understand that. And we have to recognize that. But the question is, can we adjust our priorities to make sure there's space enough to look out for those on the outside? It will cost us in our resources. To provide for the needs of others will cut into what we spend for ourselves. And again, if we don't have any room for that, we have to ask ourselves, one, are we in a position that we can't, period? And so we are creative about how we show hospitality. Or if we spend the majority of our income on ourselves, we might have to make some adjustments to be able to do this. Because again, this call is for all of us to practice and to grow in that practice. And lastly, it's going to challenge our friendships. We grow to love and appreciate our friends, our families, and we like to hang out with them because it's comfortable. We know them. We know who they are. We know how they laugh, they joke, and we're at ease there. But do you remember when you were on the outside of that and breaking in? How nice it was to be a part of in, and how you as a part expanded that friend group in a certain way. God is calling all the nations to himself to make this community diverse and colorful and interesting and full of dynamic differences, and yet with this unity in Christ. And he's calling us to be on the forefront of that, which is going to challenge our comfortable friendships, because we are being asked to move in a way that would allow other people in. So church, we have all the tools, we have the knowledge, we understand how these things are worked, but it will take us to go from potentially being passive to being active in the pursuit of hospitality. But I want us to recognize the beauty of this. We can look around the world and see all the problems that are going on because of division, because of lack of trust, because of lack of care and community, because people don't listen to one another. And if we are at the forefront of working at hospitality and care for one another and love for one another and service to one another, this community will stand out as being fresh and unique and something that people will want to be a part of, because they can't help but say it's so different. And that is how we hope that God's mercy will be at work in us. By the nature of his mercy, we will overcome evil with good. We will overcome the divisions and the difficulties by nature of us being a people of God's love to one another and to the community around us. So let's journey in the how-tos of how to be a people of hospitality together. Peace.